I'm Simplayan. My ancestral name is Simplayan. It's me. I'm from the village of Aslahan up in North Vancouver. I currently live down in the village of Humokchasin, Capilano Reserve. What I'm going to share with you, first of all, I'm grateful for each and every one of you, our respected elders, and all our matriarchs. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What I'm going to share with you is some history that may not be, some people aren't able to share their stories, and what I'm going to share is about Indian day school and Indian residential schools. These were government policies that were created. Indian residential schools first came about in 1894, and it was government policy where the government would remove children from their reserves and take them to Indian residential schools, which was away from their homestead, and it was government policy that made it against the law for children to remain in their homes. And later on in the late 1800s, Indian day schools were created, and again these were policies where our Indigenous and Aboriginal children were removed from their homes. Indian day school students like myself, we went to the Indian day school and we returned home. Indian residential schools, we were removed from our home and moved to an Indian residential school. Myself, I attended St. Paul's Indian Day School in North Vancouver, and I also attended Seashell Residential School on the Sunshine Coast. Government policies that were in place at the time made it against the law for us Indigenous students to speak our Aboriginal or Indigenous languages. So it was policy at the time that made it against the law for us to speak our own languages. And when we did speak our own language, we were often reprimanded and disciplined, sometimes really horrifically. Some of us were whipped with leather straps or rulers with metal bars. We think that residential schools was 100 years ago. It was very real. It was very recent. The last residential school closed in 1996 in Saskatchewan. So, it was a government policy from 1894 up until 1996. So that was a 139-year legacy where 160,000 Indigenous children were removed from their homes. Some of those children never made it home. Some of the children, they died at the hands of those in the residential schools, and some of them were fleeing the residential school, and they died. They perished because a lot of the children that were running away from the schools, they froze to death. If we think of how many children didn't survive. We think of how many children were affected when they came home, because when we came home from residential school, we weren't, for ourselves, we weren't brought back to our home reserve in Saan. We were sent to our maternal grandparents' house on Musqueam. And so we never returned home until our father had remarried and we went back to our home reserve on mission. But it wasn't, there were so many families that weren't able to make it home. And if we think of the challenges we see in society today, we see a lot of Indigenous or Aboriginal people struggling in life with alcohol and drugs and domestic violence. We think of the people that aren't able to heal. They learn to cope through life using negative coping mechanisms, and we think, well, why do they continue this behavior? if we think back, a lot of us who endured the physical, sexual, psychological, emotional abuse in residential schools, how has that impacted our lives today? For many years myself, I really struggled with alcohol and drugs, and it took a long time for me to heal that 5-year-old boy when I endured a lot of the physical and sexual abuse, the times that I was beaten for speaking Squamish, the times I was beaten for speaking Musqueam, and there were other students that were given the same types of, that received the same types of abuse. So how can we heal as a people? How can we heal? It's taken me many years to understand and to forgive myself as the 5-year-old boy, to forgive myself because I didn't have the courage to say no to those abuses. So we think a big picture of all the survivors across Canada. We see the struggles I'll use the downtown east side as an example. We see so many people that are really struggling and really hurting, but they don't have the strength to share their story. And we think of, so much heartache, so much trauma that people have endured. So if we can take our judgment hats off and we can look at and accept people for who they are, for the struggles they've endured. I keep thinking back to my 3 older brothers. I have 3 older brothers that passed away. 2 died horrifically, alcohol and drugs. My older brother John died of massive strokes, and they never got a chance to share their experience to someone of authority. We do have I have older siblings, and we still don't see acceptance for what has happened. Sure, there has been formal apologies from prime ministers, but for myself, I didn't think that apology was heartfelt. And so what can we do, what can I do as a survivor of both Indian day school and residential school? I believe it's my responsibility to be able to share my story. Some of my story can be really horrific for other people. When I'm sharing my story with different grades, I do make sure I share age-appropriate language because I don't want to traumatize our students. Our history of Indian day schools and Indian residential schools will never go away, but what I can share with each and every one, especially our educators, how can we move forward as educators? We can't ignore history. We can't change history. History has happened. Some of that history is really horrific. Some of that history, we can't magically make that history change and disappear. But what we can do as educators, we can teach our children that they give our children an opportunity to have a voice, that nothing like what happened in Indian day schools, what happened in Indian residential schools will never happen to another child in this country again. So what can I do as a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather? I can really show that there is hope. There is hope that I can heal so my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren will never experience that pain. Does that take away the pain? No. But when I started healing myself, I needed to forgive my perpetrators, not because it made their behavior right. I forgave my perpetrators so they don't live rent-free in my head. I can honestly say I can go to sleep at night knowing I have peace. I can go to sleep knowing I have healed those really horrific traumas. And that's what we can do with our children. I encourage all educators to really understand our history. We're not asking you to we have to understand truth and reconciliation has to happen. I'm saying that we need to learn our history. There are other horrific histories in the world, and it's my responsibility to understand and to have compassion. And I hope that all of you will understand that we're not asking you to say, okay, we have to abide by all Indigenous education. No, we're asking you to understand and have a compassionate heart that horrific things have happened to us, but we as a people need to move forward. And that's what I hope to share with each and every one of you. I hope everyone has a really awesome day. And I'll share one thing that my grandmother shared with me. She said, if you see someone without a smile, give them yours. And with that, I say, Timat Takwitsi, that's the way it is. OCM.